How are you all doing? Good. This is a great turnout. You guys have a very active leadership group here. I remember during the campaign getting to know all 10 of our districts, and I was really impressed with the capacity here in D8. This is really a fantastic organization, and I appreciate how you bring people together, keep the community informed and engaged. So delighted to be here. I see your new council member has arrived. Hello, Councilor Candela, good to see you. So we're gonna do about a 15 to 20 minute presentation. I will go as quickly and efficiently as I can. I'll try to talk quickly to get through it, and then we'll do Q&A for maybe another 20 minutes. And unfortunately, I do have another commitment around 8 o'clock, so I'll have to be pretty quick. So this is a preview of the March budget message. There's a little bit of an experiment. Typically, in fact, as long as I've been paying attention, the mayor has come out after the March budget message and done community meetings in the spring before the final budget message in June. So why don't we go to the first slide here? I want to give you a quick overview of the process. So as you probably know, in San Jose, unlike most big cities, we do not have what's called a strong mayor model, where the mayor is the chief executive who can hire and fire department heads. Every decision about budget or policy in San Jose is made by a majority of 6 or more council members, which is what you tend to have in smaller cities. So we're kind of in a hybrid position, though, because the charter carves out a few special areas of responsibility for the mayor. And one of those is leading the budget process. Now, it still takes 6 votes to approve, but the mayor drives the process. So what we just ended with was a council priority setting process. We had a couple of meetings with the council. I got to hear everybody's input on what they care about, what they think about some of the priorities that I've laid out at a high level, and I'm incorporating that into my March budget message, which comes out in exactly 1 week. It'll be about, 25 pages. You're going to get a preview, and then what I'd love to do is come back in the spring, either this meeting or another D8 community meeting, and give you more detail as we're farther along. The fiscal year starts July 1, so we're still very early in the process. But after I put out the budget message, the council can weigh in and make some tweaks to it, and then once it's approved, the city manager goes off and does the really hard work of figuring out where every single dollar is going to go and has to balance that budget and put together the 1,000-page document, literally, with all of the exact line items that align with the direction that we give in my March budget message. And then there's the final step, the June message. So we get the proposed operating budget back from the city manager. I get one last chance to make tweaks, put together another message, and bring it back to council for final approval. So that's the process between now and mid-June. We're still right before that. We're good to go. We're right at the March budget message. So, before I get into what will be in the message, let me give you a bit of an overview. Let's go to the next slide. San Jose has a $6 billion budget. It sounds like a lot of money. But you should be aware that most of that money is spent on capital improvements that are long-term bonds and spending plans that are upgrading big infrastructure. And that's kind of locked in. There's not a lot that we're changing there. And then special funds are what we also call city enterprises. These are things like the airport, the wastewater treatment facility that are fee-funded, user fee-funded. You use the service, you pay a fee. The fees by state law are supposed to be charged at the level of the cost of providing the service. So what's left, and what we're really talking about here for the most part, is the general fund, 29%. So let's keep going. What's in the general fund? All right, well, I'm trying to give you a sense of how this is broken down here. The biggest area of expenditure in the general fund, again, this is not your airport, not wastewater treatment and sewers, not the garbage contracts, certainly not the schools. Who has the schools? The school board, school districts, county board, and the state. That's the line of funding and authority around schools. No hospitals in here. Who has the hospitals? County. No jail. County. Foster care system. County. Okay. You get the idea. So, in our general fund, these are core city services that we provide. Public safety being our #1 most fundamental priority. You see police, fire, a growing area of the budget has become housing and homelessness. Now, I'm including in there, for those of you paying attention, I'm including Measure E, recent transfer tax that we passed on properties over $2 million. So I'm including both the housing department and all the Measure E funding there. You see reserves and transfers, a lot of that is rainy day funding and other encumbered funds. Don't worry too much about that. Parks and Rec, Public Works, transportation is mostly road paving, libraries, planning and building, 1% of that budget, that's all of your land use, planning, permits, code enforcement is in there as well. And then city administration, and the administrative piece is also includes some administration of those special funds. So it's not all just to manage these things. So that gives you a sense of where your general fund is going. Let's keep going with what's next. Okay, that slide doesn't need to be in there anymore. We can cut that for the next one. You're only like the fourth group to see this, by the way. It's very iterative. I'm doing about 30 of these over the next couple of weeks. So let me give you just a little bit of perspective here that's important. Context. Which is, I like to say, San Jose is a big city with a small budget. And what I mean by that is on a per capita or per person basis, we actually have relatively low tax revenue. See sales tax revenue here, we're way down here. $151 per person per year in sales tax revenue coming to the city. Cupertino over here, $742. What do you think special about Cupertino? One company in particular, throwing their product in your pocket. Yeah, Apple, okay. So we're pretty low there. Let's go to the next one. Property tax revenue, same things in Palo Alto, Mountain View. Anybody guess why? I'll say two big sources of funding for a city's general fund. Property and sales taxes. Why are we at the low end of both of those? Lack of jobs. It's the ratio of employers and jobs to housing. We were built historically through annexation as a suburban bedroom community for the job centers on the peninsula. We're the only large city in America whose daytime population shrinks to go commute to other cities to work. And they work in buildings that generate property tax revenue. They also buy things, and those businesses buy things, generating a lot of economic activity and property and sales tax revenue for those cities. So I set that as context because, well, actually, let me give you one more piece of context. That's the revenue side. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about obligations. We also, and we're not alone in this, tax-based issue is actually for big cities pretty unique. But the pension challenges we face are something that a lot of cities in California and quite a few states have faced. We've been at a kind of pretty bad end of the spectrum on this. There is some good news here. So basically, the very short story is, it's a period of time when the city signed up for pension and healthcare retirement benefits for employees, but assumed a rate of return in the stock market, basically, the investments that were being made in those retirement funds that were really optimistic. 8.5% returns every year. I don't know about you, my portfolio is not getting 8.5% every year. So for many years, we were not achieving those returns, but nobody wanted to deal with the problem, kind of look the other way. Eventually, it became so obvious that this was a problem that Mayors Reed and then Mayor Ricardo and others, including some folks in this room, got involved in saying, we got to do something about this. And the voters, in their infinite wisdom, passed Measure B and then Measure F and got us on a better path. Why does all this matter? Why am I saying all this? Because every year up to today, a big chunk of our general fund, literally up to 20% of that thing, comes off the top to pay off unfunded commitments that we made 20, 30 years ago. That's just a tax, basically, off the top of current services. The good news is this, that curve is just starting to bend. We have now gotten ourselves, thanks to your support for pension reform, on the very long 20-year glide path to eventually unwinding all of that debt. What that means is each year there will be incrementally a little more money to spend on police and fire and roads and parks for today's residents, which is a great thing. Okay, so let's keep going. All of this combines to say, okay, big city, yes, big city problems, big city needs, all true, but revenue, really low per capita, because we don't have a lot of jobs, and obligations and debts basically really high, which all leads to very low staffing levels, and hence every resident complaint I have ever heard. My water response times are slow, my roads aren't well paved, my parks aren't well maintained. So this is just important context for where we are. To me, it argues for a couple of things. It argues for having a strong economic development strategy and figuring out how we're going to attract jobs and business activity. It also argues for focus. We can't have a lot of nice-to-haves because we are struggling to even properly staff the basic core services that we also desperately need and really rely on, those foundational services. You see that number there, that end, you probably can't see it. We're at about 7,000 employees in the city, or 7 per 10,000 residents. Most big cities are well over 10. So higher, much higher staffing than we have today. Okay, let's keep going. So, this is not properly sized, but basically the summary is we have some significant historical challenges relative to a small tax base and high accrued obligations. We do project a modest $29 million surplus this year. However, we have $100 million in American Rescue Plan money we're spending this year that will not be there next year. That's federal stimulus funding, one time, spending this year. Vast majority of it will be spent. There's no new federal stimulus coming in. So a $30 million surplus is actually going to look like, or feel like, a $70 million cut this year. So I'd like you to keep that in mind. Luckily, we planned for that. We funded these things on a one-time basis. But you're going to hear about a lot of things getting cut that we did during the pandemic that we no longer have funding for. A lot of rent relief, a lot of food distribution, things that traditionally the county and state used to do that we took on that we don't have the means to do going forward. Also, we're projecting a $20 million deficit in the next fiscal year. We're assuming a mild recession in the next year, which is what our best analysis shows. So keep that in mind as well. So I will not be recommending that we take the $29.9 million surplus this year and commit it to ongoing spending. That would be a big mistake. We're not going to have it next year. Okay, positive side of the ledger. I don't know if we can, on the positive side, passengers at the airport are up. Foot traffic downtown is slowly, we're about 70% of pre-pandemic levels, slowly coming up. Sales and property tax revenue has been very resilient. Property tax revenues continue to go up about 5% a year. The bad side of that is that housing is really, really expensive, right? Negative side of the ledger, really two big areas. We're hearing a lot about layoffs at big employers. So far, it's pretty modest. In fact, unemployment in San Jose, the last report had it down to 2.5%. That's pretty good. That's very good. So far so good, but there are some storm clouds on the horizon. The other is just our early indicators around real estate investment activity are all showing huge declines. We expect that measure e-funding to drop significantly. So that's kind of where we are. What I want to close on here, and I'll use the last, whatever I have, 5 to 8 minutes here on, are the priorities that are the areas where I am pushing us to put more resources, more attention, more willingness to experiment, and basically the things that I think we should be actually looking at on a regular basis in City Council. That is not to say there are not a bunch of other important things out there that we're working on. In fact, there are a lot of important things we're doing that we're doing pretty well, but we should just keep going. We're spending your measured T dollars paving the roads. Hugely important. Let's keep doing that. I'm not suggesting any changes to that. We're doing a bunch of work on our climate smart plans. Not suggesting that we change that. I mean, there's a lot out there in progress. But the way I thought about this, my team and I, is where are the areas where we should focus on trying to significantly change the outcomes we're getting right now with the limited resources and capacity that we have. And these are the 4 we came up with, which we felt were the most foundational. Safety, homelessness, cleanliness, talking a lot about Blake during the campaign, and then being a more attractive place for investment in jobs and housing where it makes sense, where we have infrastructure, places like downtown. All right, let's jump into the first one. On safest big city in America, it is probably not a surprise to any of you, our biggest challenge is staffing. I talked about low staffing levels. Our department has about 11 officers for every 10,000 residents. Most big cities have 20 to 30, some have even more. So we have a fraction of the staffing of most other cities, which leads to slower response times, less capacity to do all the prevention and follow-up investigations that we want. So I'm pushing for us to increase headcount, but not just headcount. You'll see in my budget message when it comes out in a week, if you take a look at it, a lot of investments in greater recruiting, retention strategies, and use of technology. There will be about 3 to 5 pages in that budget doc just around investments in public safety. One that I also highlight here, 2 more, but one is call differentiation. We have a lot of growing number of 911 calls coming in, many of which are for things that officers were never hired or trained to do. And so looking at alternative responses to mental health calls, homelessness calls, youth-related calls, where somebody else was not a highly trained and frankly fairly expensive officer with a gun and a badge could be the first responder, somebody else, alternative response. We've had some success with that with our mobile crisis assessment team, responding to mental health calls. Finally, I mentioned technology. We've seen a lot of success the department has with automatic license plate readers. And a lot of those were funded on a one-time basis, and I want to make sure that we protect the funding in an ongoing way for those ALPRs, we call them, and expand our use of that technology because it has really helped us with stolen vehicles and cracking a lot of other cases. Okay, those are, and again, I'm staying high level. These are just highlights, and I want to save time for your feedback and your questions. So let's keep going. Homelessness, okay. Any given night, we have 5,000 people living outside. We don't have a lot of places for people to go. The basic formula, in my opinion, is we need cost-effective, scalable places for people to go, and we need to start requiring that people come inside and use those places. But you can't expect to require somebody to come inside if you don't have somewhere safe for them to go. So I'm calling for us to dramatically expand transitional housing. We can deploy these at 1/5 the cost of permanent supportive and build them in less than a year. We're also starting to look at private sites for scaling this even further. We've so far limited ourselves to public lands. We're now starting to look at underutilized commercial and industrial land. We've done, you've probably read, we've done a bit with motel conversions. So how do we get scale? 5,000 people? We can't keep tackling this at building brand new apartments at 50 units a top. We're never going to get there, especially at $1 million a month. So that's the big focus. I also am a big believer in the research supports investing in prevention. Anybody want to guess what it costs us per person per year when somebody's living outside in unsheltered conditions? Almost, not quite that bad. The last study that was done about 5 years ago that I saw for our region, for our county, and it was over $65,000 per year per person who's outside. Once someone's outside in unmanaged conditions, it's the worst possible situation for them, and the cost on the wider community is huge. Emergency room visits, police and fire response, trash pickup, environmental destruction remediation. So, identifying someone who's just had a loss of income, a messy divorce, whatever it may be, who's about to fall into homelessness and intervening and stabilizing them, spending a few $1,000s on that is far less expensive than $65,000 plus per year per person. And the research shows that even looking years later, after that subsidy is gone because it's a short-term assistance, the vast over 90% of those folks are still staying in the house. So that one-time intervention actually can save money and a ton of unnecessary trauma. So investing in prevention makes sense. We'll continue to support the county and the work they're doing around building permanent supportive housing. We do have a role to play in that. And then finally, advocate, I know you can't read it there on the screen, but advocate for mental health care expansion. That is the county and the state. I was just in Sacramento on behalf of the city of San Jose last week, advocating for reforms to our conservatorship laws and an expansion of inpatient care facilities so that the folks who you see who are in dire straits out on our streets, small percentage of the homeless population, to be clear, but folks who are really unable to care for themselves can be compelled into inpatient care for a period of time, not indefinitely, but for a short period of time. That's something we're working on in Sacramento right now. Let's keep going. Cleanest big city. Pat mentioned inauguration. Every weekend we're out in a different neighborhood in the city with a neighborhood association. We're averaging 100 people per event doing cleanups. We love to partner in D8 on one, but we're doing projects that include tree planting, painting over graffiti, spreading out mulch, weeding, picking up litter, just trying to build community, build neighbor associations through beautification projects. I want to make a big investment in our 311 app. We have a 311 app, and it has gotten better over the last year. It's been a big focus of mine as the chair of the Smart Cities Committee last year, but we still have a long way to go. My vision for this app is that you should have on your phone, in your hand, a tool that allows you to take a photo of a basic local problem, a pothole, graffiti, illegal dumping, a street light that's out, and without having to take a bunch of time to log in and fill out one form, it should geolocate, tie it to who you are, where you live. You should all send it in, and within a few days get a notification back, ideally with a photo showing it done. It was fixed. It should be seamless, like every other consumer app on your phone. We can do that. Capital Silicon Valley, this is not crazy. We can do this. I want to invest in that. Gateways is about really better partnering with Caltrans, Valley Water, identifying highly visible gateways, clearing them as we expand shelter capacity, and keeping them clear and clean. Hiring in-house residents to the city. It's something we do, but it's subscale. We do that for about 40 people a year at any given time. We should be doing it for 400. And then last one here, I'm sorry about the visual, but relaunch Adopt a Block program. As part of the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative, there used to be a program where people and small businesses could sign up to adopt a block for graffiti abatement and other cleanup. And we want to bring back, I'd like to bring back something like that. And then finally, the last one is we get your questions. Next slide. There we go. Investing jobs in housing. So I talked before, homelessness, we've got this huge housing crisis because we don't have enough housing supply. We've seen jobs and population in the region grow without really housing. We need jobs. We talked about our job-based, tax-based issue and lack of jobs. The reality is every dollar of investment in our city in new housing and new jobs flows through one bottleneck in our city, and that's our planning department. That department today has a last time I checked, 27% vacancy rate. I'm asking Michael Logan on my team, who's here. Over 25% of the seats in that department are empty. I'll lay out in the message a series of strategies for reducing those, including partnering with San Jose State and other community colleges to create part-time roles in the department with the vacancy savings we have, to get people starting to work in the department and learn the ropes, and if they're performing, guarantee them a job when they graduate. Great pipeline, because we're really struggling to recruit and retain for this and some of our other departments. Another idea we're putting forward is the idea of a dedicated project manager. We have a lot of applications that come in, but because we have 5 different departments involved in the process of applying for a permit to do almost anything, it's far too easy for it to get stuck on somebody's desk and nobody knows where it is. So tracking, transparency, having a project manager who wakes up every morning thinking about for every application in their portfolio, what do I need to do to accelerate it? Where is it and how do I get it to the next step as quickly as possible? A single point of contact for applicants. Finally, hiring some capacity here. Our Office of Economic Development is far smaller than other cities. We need a dedicated downtown manager who's thinking every day about how to make our downtown safe and clean and vibrant, because that should be our engine of economic activity and where we grow tax base and where we build housing for our kids and grandkids. It's where we're putting $10 billion into bringing BART and electrifying Caltrain. And we need somebody who's focused on driving those initiatives forward. And then a business recruitment manager. Every other big city in America has somebody, actually has a whole team, that every single day is out there recruiting companies to come to their city and pitching them on relocating to or expanding into their city. We do not have capacity to do that today, but we should. And if we're ever going to have the tax base to provide the staffing and services we all deserve, it's only going to happen because we get employers to come and stay in San Jose. So that is an overview. There will be much more in the message, and we will send it around to everyone in a week. but I would love to hear your initial feedback and questions, and then if I'm allowed, I'd love to come back in June and update you on what's in the final message. So with that, do some questions? All right. Yeah.
Historically, they've tried to redo downtown many times. I feel like they fail every single time. What do you think they're doing?
Yeah, so the question around past attempts to revitalize downtown, I think the big difference is that Silicon Valley, you're right, downtown has always been growing in fits and starts. There's some momentum and then it dies. And every time it's left a little bit better, but it's never really gotten into that cycle, that virtuous cycle. I think there are a few things here. One of the big ones is knowing that BART is coming. And one of my big focuses this year, has to be done this year, is to complete the funding. We are just $375 million short. If anybody has that in the couch cushions, let me know. Once we secure the final $375 million from some combination of VTA and MTC, we unlock $4.6 billion in federal funds that have been allocated and we lose by the end of the year. And if we can confirm that BART is coming, there are a lot of employers who will bet on that because the long-term advantage for them is knowing that they can move tens of thousands of employees in and out of our downtown efficiently. And with the rest of Silicon Valley being built out and being a really expensive place to build and being pretty anti-growth, downtown San Jose is poised with these infrastructure investments to be the next most logical place for a lot of investment to flow. So I think that's an advantage. We have started to bring back a police presence in a more consistent way where we've invested in foot patrols. Of course, we need the staffing to do that, but having foot patrols downtown. The other thing we're looking at is with that downtown manager, coordinating all the entities that have venues and do programming to have predictable 365-day-a-year programming and then marketing to our residents. Most of our residents don't even know all the amazing stuff happening downtown. So instead they go to Palo Alto and San Francisco. And we've got to market what's happening in downtown and help people understand that there's all these great cultural events and things happening and they should come view. So I don't think there's a silver bullet or there's going to be some big crazy thing we're going to do that's just going to magically change downtown. I think it's a lot of very obvious stuff that we haven't been doing and we need to do consistently. And then the big one is the transit infrastructure. It's an open question. I'm on the phone a lot these days asking people for $375 million, or pieces of it. Just had a meeting with the governor's office. They're going to be supportive of some additional funding. We're going to have to get VTA to pony up some money. So yeah, there's some work to be done to get there, but we have to. We're talking about leaving $4.6 billion in federal funding on the table, so we got to get it done. Yes, sir.
City ordinance has clarified gun owners in the city and $25 fee now. First of all, liability protection. I read that David said it's not since that was an act effective January 1st, there has been $0 collected. As far as security, no one knows.
Yeah.
Everything you talk about, a way to enforce this or either abandon this thing completely, because it ain't working.
Yeah. Yeah, the question was on the gun insurance requirement and the gun fee that was passed last year. The fee is not in effect yet because it's held up in the courts. The insurance went into effect January 1, and there is no plan, there never was a plan to do proactive enforcement, but it is in effect. What that means is, if a firearm goes off in your home, or for some other reason, an officer needs to come to your home, they can ask if you have guns in the home. And if you do, they can ask to see your proof of general liability. So that is in place. The fee is not yet in effect. And basically, both have been challenged in the courts. Thus far, the level at which the case is has thrown out most of the challenges, but there are still a couple that are active. And my view has been, let's at least let it work its way through the courts and see where the lawsuits land. So that's kind of where we are. As you may know, I raised some concerns with the implementation of these rules last year and voted against part of it. But we'll see.
I think it was a well-intended effort. It may yet do some good. It also adds a lot of complexity, and there's not a great enforcement mechanism. So there are some challenges with it too. So yeah, that's where it is. It's in the courts, and we'll see what the courts say. Yeah. Sorry, who was it? Were you? Well, good.
Right there. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Mayor Ray, with public safety as the number one priority, is there a line item in the budget for bolstering the community emergency response team training program?
That's something my office has actually led on in the last few years, and so I need to make sure that they fully, it's actually one of the things we're looking into this week as we're working through this budget plan. I was just talking about that in a meeting. We got some additional funding allocated last year. I need a status update on how well it's been used and whether or not there's still funding available, but I may advocate that we put a little more into the CERT program. I am a big believer in that idea of training our residents out in our neighborhoods to be ready for emergency response, because when the next big, quake or whatever it is hits, it's going to take a while for first responders to get to everybody, and we're going to want to have that capacity in our neighborhoods. So I'm a big supporter of the program. I just don't know exactly how much funding they need and how they're going to use it. The big move, having been in touch with some of the CERT leaders in our city, has been to set up a dedicated nonprofit that can also go fundraise and has a little more autonomy and be less dependent on one person at City Hall to help manage it. And I'm very supportive of that. That was actually a budget doc that I put together last year. Thanks for the question.
The city's gonna be in charge of the process for those who's unhoused and resident. They wanna hire for clean the city, right? So how's gonna be the process and
For hiring?
how this gonna work?
Yeah.
Because it's unhousing, it's only, right?
Yeah. Well, the primary goal is to get people housed. That's the main goal. We have 2 programs today related to creating entry-level jobs and some income and the kind of stability of work and the opportunity to add more services when somebody is working. And the primary one that I want to expand is called San Jose Bridge. San Jose Bridge is run by Goodwill, and it gives people a steady job with some job training, but they start out just cleaning up the city, literally just picking up trash, but can graduate into working in other jobs at Goodwill and can get support with job training and resume work. We do our best when someone's in that program to get them placed into housing so that we're on a parallel path there. But there isn't always housing available. We have a real shortage of available housing. So that program has shown promise, but it's really small. It helps very few people today. It's about, last I checked, it was 37 people who are currently enrolled. We actually had some funding to do more than that. We're trying to sort of figure out why that hasn't scaled more. There's another program called Cash for Trash, which is a very different thing. It's less about employment and income. We pay $4 per trash bag. We have about 200 people at any given time in the city enrolled in the program. It's mostly about diverting trash from our creeks. So we go to large encampments, give them those green trash bags, and actually pay them to create incentive for putting the trash in the bags and bringing it out to save us from having to go fish it out in the creek later. Yeah, and that's another program that you'll see in my message. I'm arguing that we should expand. At $4 a bag, it's a bargain really, because it's about incentivizing behavior change and giving people basic tools and some incentive to just manage trash. And then we put them on a weekly pickup for those trash bags. And it's so much better than having tons of trash in the creek and out to the bay. We lost a $100 million lawsuit over how much trash was going into our creeks a few years ago. So this at $4 a bag is a bargain, frankly. Yeah, good question.
I just want to make a comment. I mentioned this to the other day. I worked in elementary school. We had a little situation that I told our secretary to call 911. She did. She got transferred to fire and police, at which point she got poisoned.
Wow, that's terrible.
They called back 7 minutes later. Luckily, we had solved the issue like that, but just want to let you know.
Yeah, I'm glad to know about that. That's a dispatcher.
I'll talk to you, each other, I'll talk to you about, and I'll look up and see what happened and find out why and make sure that doesn't happen. Very important.
Yeah. And by the way, those kinds of examples are incredibly helpful. Yes, it was I don't want to misstate if I do talk about a call from a school, the 911 call that ended up being transferred or forwarded to a voicemail, and then a call came back 7 minutes later. So it didn't get a live dispatcher on the line. Is that accurate? Yeah. So these kinds of examples, by the way, and then I'll come to you, are very helpful. I don't know if it's in the last slide or not, but we have an email called mayor at, if we go to the, so you can leave that up. You can scan that if you want ongoing updates on the budget. That's just a QR code. But my email is mayor@sanjoseca.gov. We get a lot of these examples, and we're going to pass something down in a moment that has that. We get examples of a 311 call or a 911 call or some other request for service that went wrong. And then my team is very diligent about going and following the thread to figure out where the breakdown was in the process. And we often figure out there's something that's broken down. So it's really useful to hear these stories. It sounds like you're signed up for this one.
No problem.
So I want to sign it to my team. All right, thanks, Captain. Yeah.
I live beside the Blue Picnic Park and happen to be now the area between the Norwood and even to the considered well and safe. Today I saw there was a poor dog under leash and the police also. And you call the police, you call 911, they say, oh, call 311. And nobody even, no police officer, nobody show up, nobody does it. So what the people are sleeping on the neighborhood, in my neighborhood, where are the fear? Some people are going to a park, they are waiting at home, okay, nobody's around, nobody's stealing, nobody's doing the burglary, that's what it is. So we will wait up to this budget, something is gonna happen. And we were having one accident, one of the kids died, and we called during the night, okay, they show up when we really died. So, what are the measures? And I requested to the police, at least once in a while, make a round around that
Yeah.
area. So,
You know-
they will know something is happening.
Yeah.
And my suggestion was, around that Hill Park, where the people are living, there should be one light, like a volume light, after 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock.
Better lighting.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're on one side, and you can see on the other side what's happening. So if there are lights, at least the kids, like not only the teenagers, they don't come, they will see, like they
Yeah.
will be seeing.
Let me make 2 points on that quickly, and then if the captain wants to jump in, that'd be great too. On the lighting point, I'll just say this, and I was going to mention this. When we get past the March message and before the final budget, each council office, your council member has an opportunity to put together something called budget documents. These are specific requests for one-time investments in the district. Things like lighting are a great example. Lighting, crosswalks, speed humps, tree planting, dumpster days, physical one-time investments. So it's helpful for everyone to send ideas. I want to set expectations. You're only talking about, maybe $250,000 for the whole district, but targeted investments where the neighborhood, where the community feels, hey, this intersection is really dangerous, can we improve it, can flow through your council office, and they submit those to my office. On your first point about police, the most common one of, at least, if not the most common request I get has to do with police staffing, response times, controls, that capacity issue we talked about, which is largely due to the fact that we're so understaffed, which is why I've made police staffing a major priority. Just to give you perspective on this, San Francisco has 15% fewer people than San Jose and has more than twice as many police officers. And it makes it very difficult for our department to be as present and responsive as they want to be. So I don't know, it looks like you have a pressing follow-up. Go ahead, yeah.
I had like a mayor went to like around the park, we can put a sign, nobody can park after the dark.
Oh, yes, the
That
parking.
can be easiest.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So I've looked into the residential permit parking program. There's some different variations on it. We can talk with your council member offline about a parking program. I will tell you right now, our Department of Transportation is very, very resistant to adding any more of those programs because we really don't want to add restrictions that we can't enforce, and we struggle to have the capacity to do the enforcement at the level that's needed in a city of our size with the staffing levels we have. So it's not a no, it's possible, we can talk through it and evaluate it, but the city has not added additional permit parking programs because we have struggled to do adequate enforcement. And the worst thing we can do is set an expectation that this is the rule and then not enforce it. It just upsets everybody. So we can explore it. I know we're almost at time. I might be able to squeeze in one more question, but I want to thank our scouts for passing out a couple of, is it two? We have both? Okay. So there are two handouts you'll get. One includes the email to my office along with some QR codes for getting involved in beautification projects, getting our bi-weekly newsletter, staying in touch with us. The other is ways to be involved in the budget process specifically, if you would like to do that. Thank you again to our scouts for passing those out. Maybe while they're doing that, I can squeeze in one
last question.
question. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Hi.
Yes,
Speak up, please.
regarding what was done at the budget, how about the funding for running out of educator and also student? Educator and student.
Yes, so our schools and most education programming goes through the school districts, which is a separate elected body, which actually on a per capita basis is more revenue than we do. But we do have opportunities, and there'll be some thinking in my budget message around this, at our libraries and community centers. The city runs, as you probably know, libraries and community centers with programming for young people. So that's an area where we can do more, but we're not traditionally in education as you might think of it. That's your school district. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.